Aim of the game. Play the polar bears and penguins trying to save their homes by helping the colors of cold return to their pattern at the pole and bring the polar ice home. Players take turns to discover and pass icebergs from the play area to the pole zones behind the polar bears and the penguins of their color. Separate the iceberg cards from the pack and shuffle. Place the iceberg cards face down in 5 rows of 4 to create the play area for the game. Place the remaining iceberg cards face down in a pile to the side of the play area. This is called the ice pile. Place the 4 polar bear cards at one end of the play area. This marks the North Pole. At the other end of the play area, place the 4 penguin cards. This marks the South Pole. Place the moves indicator and the turn indicator on either side of the play area. This completes the setup. Each player rolls the die. The player with the highest roll chooses to play as penguins or polar bears, and thereby which pole to rebuild. The choosing player plays first. Ice Cap is played in rounds. When a polar animal, or 2 if necessary of the same species, aligns with a colored iceberg in the play area and its place in the pole zone, the iceberg is passed there immediately. Passes can be direct or indirect. When a player has used all their moves or forfeits the remainder, play passes to the other player. The polar bear has rolled the higher number and therefore is playing first, as indicated by the player indicator. The number rolled is a 5, which is placed on the 5 of the moves indicator. The polar player begins the turn by flipping over an iceberg of his or her choice. If the colored iceberg revealed belongs to the player's pole, indicated by the North Star or the Southern Cross, the player continues to play. Here is an example of a direct pass. When a revealed iceberg is in the same row as the polar animal responsible for it, it may pass directly into a pole zone using one move. When an iceberg is added to its pole zone, it must be used to build a row behind the polar animal responsible for it. When a player returns an iceberg to its row in its pole zone, the player draws a new iceberg card from the ice pile or their responsibility pile and places it in an empty card space in the play area. Remember, flipping the iceberg costs 1 move, and placing it in the pole costs another. The polar bear player now has 3 moves remaining as indicated by the moves indicator. The polar bear player now uses his or her next turn to flip over another iceberg card. When a revealed iceberg is not in the same row as the polar animal responsible for it, another polar animal of the same species can assist the one responsible. This is an example of an indirect pass, where the green polar bear assists the blue polar bear responsible for the blue iceberg. The blue iceberg is passed into its pole zone using 2 moves. An iceberg is replaced, and the turn is over. Remember, flipping the card and bringing it to its pole zone costs the remaining 2 moves. Play now turns to the penguin player. He or she rolls the die to determine the number of moves. The penguin player rolls a 6, which is placed on the 6 of the moves indicator. The penguin player begins his or her turn by flipping over an iceberg card. This is another example of an indirect pass where the blue penguin assists the green penguin responsible for the green iceberg. The green iceberg is passed into its polar zone using 2 moves. An iceberg card is drawn from the ice pile and is placed in the empty space. Remember, flipping the green iceberg used 1 move. Using the assisted indirect pass to move the green iceberg to its polar zone used 2 moves. So, in total, 3 moves were used, and the penguin player has 3 moves remaining. The penguin player uses the next move to flip an iceberg card. The yellow iceberg has a North Star on it. If the revealed iceberg belongs to the pole of the opponent, the player removes it from the player area and places it face down in the opponent's responsibility pile. The player forfeits any remaining turns, and play moves immediately to the opponent. It is now the polar bear player's turn. He or she rolls a 3. The polar bear player then flips an iceberg card. Because this green iceberg card has a Southern Cross on it, the card is now the responsibility of the penguin player. It is placed in his or her responsibility pile. The polar bear player's turn is now over. It is now the penguin player's turn. He or she rolls a 4 and uses the first move to flip an iceberg card. The green iceberg is in line with the penguin responsible for it and can be placed in its pole zone using one move. The penguin player now replaces an iceberg card from his or her responsibility pile in preference to the ice pile. Remember, flipping one iceberg card over costs one move, and placing it in its pole zone costs another. With 2 moves left, the penguin player now flips over another iceberg card. The flipped purple iceberg card has a North Star, therefore the responsibility of the polar bear player and placed in the polar bear player's responsibility pile. When an iceberg is sent to the opponent's responsibility pile, an iceberg is not replaced on the playing area. And so ends the penguin player's turn.